IC Ethics launched the meeting room series to talk about specific topics in relation to the museum world and to the professionals operating in the sector. Today, I'm really delighted to chair this session, primarily because it's May the 18th, so the International Museum Day. Secondly, because of the topic we decided to talk about, and I think that is strongly relevant in relation to the days we are all experiencing now. And last but definitely not least, because in a short while I will introduce you Cristina da Milano, a knowledgeable expert in the museum field, and not only, with a terrific expertise in project and in the whole creative and cultural sector. She is also a wonderful woman, and I really honored to say a friend as well. Yes, Marita says, oh, yes, she approved. And so before giving the floor to Cristina, I'd like to share with you a few words about the International Museum Day, because as you probably already know, this year we are celebrating the 42nd anniversary. So since 1977, ICOM launched every year a topic that museum professionals were asked to debate in a collective and in-depth reflection to talk about the museum, the role of museums in modern society, the relevance when it comes to debate on really difficult and sensitive stories. This year, as Catherine said, the topic is equality, inclusion, and diversity. I guess that no one could foresee in 2019, when this topic was decided, the situation that the pandemic caused today to museums and especially to museum professionals. And for this reason, we decided to focus on job treatment inequalities, on the exclusion that freelancers and especially educators are experiencing since the lockdown forced to close the museum doors all around the world. I'm talking from Italy, and today on May the 18th, some museums open. In UK, probably they will open in July. In Germany, they began cautiously to open. In the United States, they remained shuttered. And in Hong Kong, they have been closed again due to a second wave of the pandemic. So many questions arise when we talk about this topic. And first of all, what does it mean for museum professionals, especially for educators and freelancers that are not hired in their institutions? I guess that all of us were astounded when the MoMA decided to fire all educators, the educators in the aftermath of the lockdown in New York. And more, what will happen when museums will open again? And basically, how many museums will open again? In a recent interview for the Spanish newspaper El País, Suay Aksoy, the president of ICOM International, stated that probably many local and small museums won't open again. And this is a really relevant point to take into account. Again, how many young professionals will be forced to change their job profile because they won't be back to their job position again? And what is the extent of the expertise and projects that will be lost due to this situation? I dream of museums as places of inclusion, equality, and raising awareness, awareness raising, sorry, both for audience and museum professionals. And the time that we are living suddenly put a spotlight on a dramatic situation that museum workers knew very well. I also hope that this meeting room could be a moment in a wider reflection on museum professions, and hopefully next fall we can dedicate a further talk or action in relation again to the International Museum Day. Actually, all the action on site has been postponed to mid-November. Specifically from the 14th to the 16th of November. And hopefully in that moment, all of us as a community can design together such specific actions. But now it's time for the preliminary speech. And Cristina da Milano, our guest, is a president of ECCOM, the European Center for Cultural Organization and Management, based in Rome, Italy. She's a board member of CAE, Culture Action Europe, and a senior researcher that devoted the most of her work to innovative methodologies and approaches to museum education and audience development. She'll talk about the diversity of museum conditions among museum professions. And so please, from this moment on, join without video, and we will see again at the end of Cristina's speech. So Cristina, the floor is yours.
Do you want me to close the video as well?
You have to share your screen. I guess that you.
No, yes, but you could see my image in the small sidebar if I don't close my video. But if you want, I can close it.
No. You can keep.
Okay, then I keep it like that. Thanks, Valeria. Thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you, Catherine, for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here today. Glad to meet you and to see some old friends like Moderator, for instance. Let me share my screen, first of all, so that we can start with my slide. I hope, Valeria, can you tell me if you can see it?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Okay, great, perfect. Then, well, Valeria told you everything about me, more or less. I am here with the head of Culture Action Europe today. Culture Action Europe is a network which actually gathers more than 150 organizations and also individual members, people and organizations working within the cultural sector all over Europe. And I am particularly glad to be here as Culture Action Europe, because Culture Action Europe is a network which does a lot of advocacy activity in Europe. And in this period, it is advocating also for security and support to the cultural sector in broad terms. And of course, museums are part of it. So it's a moment in which, let's say, cultural activism and advocacy is very important. And organizations such as this network are doing a great job. So it seems to me quite appropriate to the issue that we are going to discuss. I won't be long because I'd like you to talk and I'd like we to have a nice conversation, a nice discussion. But I'm going to share with you some thoughts, some issues, some points that came to my mind when Valeria actually invited me to participate in this talk. So, well, first of all, of course, we are within a discussion, a broader discussion about equality, diversity, and inclusion. Today is a very important day for museums because it's the International Day of Museums. So I think everything is quite fitting together. And well, the objectives of the day, let's say, and of the committee, the ICOM Committee for Ethics, are twofold. And the first one is to celebrate the diversity of perspectives that make up the communities and personnel of museums. And the other one is to champion tools for identifying and overcoming bias. Today we are going to discuss the issue with a specific focus, and actually the focus is the diversity of working conditions among museum professionals, as Valeria put it quite clearly at the beginning of this session. And I'm going to start by telling you that I think the scenario for this discussion is made mainly by three main issues. And the first one is that, of course, we know that this is and will be a global crisis. So in a way, it is a symmetric crisis, which is hitting all sectors of society. And this is something that we have to take into account because let's say that our problems, our worries are actually the problems and the worries of entire society in this particular moment, which in a way makes us weaker, I think, but that's another, let's say, issue that we might discuss later on. The second point is that with specific regard to the cultural sector, and I will start by talking about the cultural sector in general, and of course considering museums as part of the sector, is that the crisis highlighted problems that were already there, and that now have exploded in a much bigger, let's say, and I would say more dramatic way. And the problems are related to the fragmentation and the complexity of the cultural sector, and especially of the professionals working within the cultural sector. We are talking of an environment in which many professionals, many small associations and organizations work without being fully recognized as stakeholders of the big public and private institutions. But we all know that without this plethora of organizations, associations, individuals, and freelancers, the whole sector won't function as it does. But there is a problem of fragmentation, complexity, and scarce visibility. Then, and this is again related to the cultural sector, the point is that it is not fully acknowledged, fully recognized, the fact that without these fragmented and complex scenario, the whole sector wouldn't work well, wouldn't work at its best, let's say. So we are in a sector in which a lot of the functions are outsourced by larger institutions, by larger cultural industries. And at the same time, we have this world, let's say, of outsourced functions, which work as an organic and primary, let's say, part of the sector in functional terms, but at the same time, it is not recognized because of the fragmentation and scarce visibility I was mentioning before. So I think we are now in this scenario. And within this scenario, I think museums particularly, And I also, in a way, have been thinking a lot about what Valeria was mentioning, the MoMA and the educators of the MoMA. This, I mean, fact is quite important in our discussion today. There are three issues that we should tackle as museum professionals, as museums in general. Well, the first one, of course, it's quite basic. There is a need of social protection. And of course, the need is first of all based on an ethical principle. Every worker should have a social protection or some sort of support in difficult moments. But the point is that we should also underline the fact that there is an interdependence between individuals and cultural production. And the interdependence requires extending forms of support and protection in order to avoid structural damages. So I would say we should go beyond the ethical principle, which is of course the very basis of all this. But let's try to, tackle the issue also in terms of functioning. I'm afraid, and I will close my speech exactly with this topic in mind, that firing the educators means a structural damage for a museum. For a museum, even for a very large and big museum such as MoMA. The second issue, the lack of visibility I was mentioning before, I think, and this is a battle that, for example, Culture Action Europe is fighting, it is absolutely vital that policymakers and big institutions understand that without this big world of professionals and small organizations working for and with museums, for example, but also with theaters, with libraries. This is, let's say, a feature of the cultural sector in general. This world will not survive. So it's a battle that has to be done, let's say, bottom up in this case. And another battle that should be fought from a bottom-up perspective is that for sustainability. For example, I'll give you some very, very clear example. We will be urged in the next months to answer some of the huge post-coronavirus challenges. Rise of educational poverty, serious form of psychic and social problems, situation of big social and psychic disadvantage, as well as the need for producing innovation, especially digital and technical innovation. We have been bombed by, pressures on this. We need to produce innovative thinking. We need to produce innovative tools for to engage people, to boost participation, etc., etc., etc. So I think this is a great opportunity for the cultural sector and for museums in particular, because we could in this way demonstrate how the whole of society needs culture and needs museum to achieve some sustainable goals in terms of not only cultural sustainability, but social sustainability. At the same time, these institutions could probably find the answer to their problems of economic sustainability if they manage to give broader answers to society. But how do we do broader answers to societal challenges? We need to invest in human capital. We need to invest in people. We need to invest in capacity building, in peer-to-peer learning. We need to invest in our main asset, which is human capital. If you have seen the NEMO survey and the recommendations of the NEMO survey, I guess you are all familiar with NEMO and the survey that they have been carrying out during these months. If not, we can discuss it later on. But they published last week the final results of the survey with 3 main recommendations. The first one, we need economic support for museum operations. And of course, this is something that in each country we are now asking. We are now asking it at the European Union level, for example, through the advocacy action of Culture Action Europe. So this is something we are all dealing with, economic support for museum operations. Investment in digital cultural heritage is the second point. And I mean, I think we should and we can probably all agree on that, but I think it's very important to realize that digitalization is a tool. We need to put content in the digitalization activities, and we need to know for whom we are doing that. So again, we need to invest in staff, in capacity building, in training, in our human capital, and in getting to know our audiences and the motivations and the needs of the people out there, educational poverty, social and physical problems that are arising and will arise in the next months. We need to be able also to give answers to these things through the digital means. But again, just to underline, these are means. The third recommendations, which I like very much, I like the way they phrased it, make museums fit for crisis. And this is a recommendation which is directed to the stakeholders at all levels. But to me, this means what I have just said. We have to be brave enough to invest in our staff, in our people. And that's why I think the whole MoMA issue is a very short-sighted way of tackling the issue. Now we are closed, we don't know when we will reopen, we don't know how the world will be when we reopen. Doesn't matter, the world, we don't know yet. Today, as Valeria said, many things reopened in Italy, but still I think we will all need some months to understand how the world will be. But for sure, the first step will be to answer to the needs of society, and you do that, especially in museums, through your staff. And through the staff, not just curators, directors, of course, these are very important professional figures, but the frontline staff, those who are in charge of the relationship with the people. So educators, mediators, who are normally those who are freelance, those who don't have social protection, and who live at the margin of the whole museum machine. Well, here is the link at the NEMO report. I wish to conclude with a thought which is not mine, but I subscribe to it. It's a thought of François Matarasso, who's an expert in community art and participatory art. I think, well, probably most of you know him. If not, I will recommend to read some of his articles and books, but he wrote an article immediately after the news coming from the MoMA about the firing of the educators. And I have taken a couple of paragraphs here because I think they are really encompassing all the things that I tried to share with you today. Participation has become a defining force in culture during the past half-century, and art institutions need to recognize and adapt to new expectations. Dismissing your educators, and of course here he's referring to MoMA, because you think you won't need them, is the choice of an institution that has not understood that change, nor begun to imagine what the world will be like when it does reopen its doors. My guess is that every cultural institution will have to renew its relationship with its audience, and that empathy will be one of the most important assets they can bring to that process. Then, the museum educators might prove to be the most important members of staff, if you can win back their trust. I think this paragraph is quite important for our discussion because it tells us that we are talking about participation, engagement, audience development. You can call it as you wish, but this is the point we will need to start again from. And how do you do that? How do you create a relationship with people? Through your staff, and especially through your educators, mediators, of course, with the whole contribution of the whole institution. But these people are going to be central and crucial for the next month's activities. At the same time, they are the less protected and the ones in which normally museums and cultural organizations invest less or cut immediately when some problems arise. So I think we should really not just, fight the battle. Here is the reference for the article of Matarazzo. We shouldn't really fight the battle because, of course, it is right and just to fight for people's right to have social protection, but it is strategic for museums to invest in human capital and in this kind of human capital. So I think we should be brave enough. In a period of crisis, the economists teach us that it is much better to keep on investing rather than to, cutting and closing reducing your activities. I think we should do that, but investing in human capital, in people. And now I leave you the floor because I would like to, be part of a discussion with you all. Thank you for having listened to me, and I was very happy to have the chance of sharing my thoughts with you and some of the battles that I'm fighting together with Culture Action Europe and many colleagues all over Europe. Thank you very, very much. I will mute my microphone now.
No. Thank you, Cristina. Clap, clap from the from the Zoom reactions. Thank you indeed, actually, for this preliminary speech that give us the opportunity to think and to see other perspectives. I think that listening to your presentation, especially to the main issues you noted, the social protection, the lack of visibility and the sustainability, that probably we should really start working on the recognition of the role of educators within the museum institutions and the recognition of the value of educational activities for museums and for society as a whole. A very important point also to talk about in these days is actually the digitalization, because everybody, all of us actually have experienced so many and different digitalized activities that have been just launched on the internet. But somehow all the activities, all the offer that museums have launched in these times were not meant to be experienced in that format. And as you were saying, Cristina, digitalization needs a specific training. It cannot be seen as a substitute of an on-site museum experience. I really like the idea of empathy as an asset this is definitely something that we can really take into account, because the human capital is definitely what makes the difference when we go and visit a museum. So now I will leave the floor to all of you that would like to participate in the discussion. We are stopping recording now, and obviously